Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So, kind of just like to welcome and introduce you to the first installment of 3D Pod. My name is Darren Finnegan. I am a kind of physio up the northeast in England, and just going to be talking all things from well-being to fitness, everything you can think about it: emotions, feeling, emotional mindset, emotional intelligence, and the whole kit and caboodle. But I have my good buddy here on the line as well with us. So we're going to do our first joint session. And it is Max Roberts from Maximum Fitness over in Killingworth in Newcastle in the northeast of England. So,
hey, thanks for having me on, Darren. I'm very excited to have verbal diarrhea with you, sir.
Oh, yes. Verbal diarrhea is the best thing on a Saturday morning. Just comes just after coffee.
Of course.
So kind of myself and Max kind of known each other a few months now. So he's obviously doing very well, kind of real successful boot camp up the northeast. Recently just been on BBC Go North.
Look north.
Look north. Shit. Oh yeah. So kind of again, just kind of spreading the message of kind of just adding value to the world and trying to keep people fit and active. So the topic for today's session, we are going to get deep into it. As we always tend to do, keep on digging. So we're going to go down the rabbit hole, and it'll be an interesting topic. So about the power of vulnerability. So it's going to be an interesting chat. We're going to take a deep dive in to both of our worlds and just see where it goes. So, Max, what is vulnerability to you, my man?
What is vulnerability to me? I think vulnerability is your ability to display your true inner self to someone with minimal fear of rejection. I think we're quite often very, very conscious and aware of being rejected to the point where that becomes a bigger magnet than actually being open to being who we are and being vulnerable. And, you know, obviously the more vulnerable you are, the easier it is to connect to people. And I think the reason why there's so much disconnection in the world is because so many people focus more on being rejected rather than focus on the possibility of creating connection through vulnerability.
Ooh, I like it because you can look at any word and there's a negative connotation and a positive connotation to it. So like people just instinctively kind of jump to the negative connotation of vulnerability and think, oh no, that's uncertainty and risk, and I'd be exposed. Whereas actually there's some beautiful power in thinking, let's reframe it, flip it on its head, and be like, being vulnerable gives you an opportunity to connect with more people.
Definitely, man. And I think, you know, like a good friend of mine who's a psychologist, a psychotherapist, she once told me that, well, she told me basically the way that your brain works is it's about survival. So everything that we do boils down to survival. And, you know, so a lot of people's defense is to basically not be vulnerable, because when you're vulnerable, you expose yourself. And if you're exposed, then, you know, you potentially could be at risk of being chucked out the tribe or killed or whatnot. So our instant, you know, feeling is to just protect ourselves and keep our guard up and whatnot. And, you know, I've definitely learned over the years that as I've become more comfortable with who I am, that I've become a lot more, the more vulnerable I get, the happier I become, and the more I know myself, and the stronger the relationships I have with people are, because I start to realize that actually the more I connect to myself with being vulnerable, the more I see that other people can recognize that themselves in me and myself and them. And then I'm finding that actually, do you know what it is? We're all pretty much going through very, very similar stuff. We quite often, I mean, I know I spent years thinking, man, I am messed up. Like, my head is a crazy place to live. If I was to take my brain out, put it in someone else's, they'd have a mental breakdown. But, you know, I think having spoken to so many people and being really vulnerable around them and expressed how I felt, and they've been like, yeah, I feel that way too. I'm like, maybe I'm not so crazy.
So you kind of, you mentioned there that you found that you've personally grown through kind of that, expressing that vulnerability. Talk us through kind of, because for a lot of the listeners, it can be quite a daunting, challenging, even concept to think, what, I need to expose myself. Not, not like take your clothes off, run through the streets naked or
I
anything,
mean, I
but
do that too, but that's how comfortable I am with being vulnerable.
hey, come here, nothing wrong with that. Hey, totally okay. Go for it if you want, but you might get arrested. But that's his caveat.
I
So
mean, doing the bodybuilding competition, being on stage in just some trunks and some bloody fake tan, that was pretty much what started the vulnerability.
it's definitely one way to start is like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go on a bodybuilding competition, strip down to my bare minimum, and just have someone critique every last muscle fiber on my body. That's pretty damn vulnerable.
Yeah,
So
sure.
definitely, and kind of in terms of how did you, when we're saying about that kind of personal growth and development from the vulnerability side, what did that look like initially when you realized that?
What did it look like when I started recognizing? Well, I think a lot of it, I mean, I was very, very fortunate growing up. My mum was very, very nurturing. You know, in my childhood, my dad had a disease called multiple sclerosis, which is a really horrible disease which attacks your central nervous system and, you know, really just deteriorates you as an individual. So, you know, my dad was a really fit, strong, smart, very, very intelligent man from what I've been told. And then obviously as he got MS, you know, I guess I learned vulnerability through my dad. And because my dad progressively got so disabled that me and my mum had to do everything for him, you know, from feeding him to showering him to, you know, taking him to the toilet to cleaning him up after the toilet, you know, there's not really much. As vulnerable as a baby was as vulnerable as my dad was. And growing up as a child, being around that, seeing how vulnerable he was. Again, at that age, I didn't recognize that was vulnerability. But I think, you know, as you mature and you get older, you recognize these things. And that's when things start to click and you start to realize. But, you know, my mum was a very, very special woman, and she really, really nurtured me as a child and really nurtured that vulnerable side of my dad and made me very, very caring towards, you know, his levels of vulnerability, which definitely made me a more compassionate person. And I think the byproduct of becoming a more compassionate person, it became a lot easier to become compassionate to myself as well. I think self-awareness is something that's really, really crucial when it comes to being able to expose yourself to vulnerability. Because obviously, if you're not self-aware, you don't really know if you're being vulnerable or not, or the times where you're more vulnerable, or you know, the more self-aware you are, the stronger you're able to connect with yourself. And I think that throughout my childhood, with being an only child and going through what I went through, and my mum being such an encouraging, kind, warm person, she made it feel it was easy to have a lot of self-talk until my dad died. And then, you know, I went through a part of my life where I lost, I think it was around about 8 family members over the course of, you know, a few years. And that was pretty intense. And it was only until after that I really struggled to become vulnerable. I almost had to, I created a big ego for myself to protect myself looking back, you know. And it wasn't only until I started getting into personal development was then when I was able to create more self-awareness and become more vulnerable with who I was and be able to utilize that to connect with other people.
Yeah, and kind of touched on some beautiful points there, and it's through adversity that a lot of us grow. But kind of that adversity can either, in some ways, make or break you. And kind of in terms of, say, in lots of situations, people use exercise as a coping strategy. Bodybuilding is, without doubt, a pretty damn good coping strategy. Get fit, get kind of ripped. Personally, I used exercise as well, and it's a case of we all have our own individualized adversities, and everyone has their own story to tell. And it's a case of kind of using them coping strategies, but then at some stage, them coping such strategies may not serve you. So,
Totally.
so
When my dad was dying, when it was at the peak of, I mean, every year he was going into hospital. But it's crazy looking back now, because I was doing my bodybuilding competition when my dad was on his last legs, and it was the best coping strategy ever, because the difficulty of bodybuilding was so hard in regards to every single day being so on point. You become so focused that you actually become really disconnected to everyone around you. You know, I became really narcissistic and egotistical,
Right.
to the point where it was, you know, because everything's about you, isn't it? You know, all your meals is about you. You're looking in the mirror all the time, making sure you're making progress. It's all about you. It's not a team sport. It's not something that you share with other people. And, you know, my coping strategy was, I became so obsessed with myself, with trying to develop this physique, that it totally distracted me and took me away from the reality of the fact that my dad was dying.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I know that's pretty intense and pretty extreme, but that's the reality of it, you know?
Yeah, and it's when you've done that kind of deep work on yourself, yes, someone else will be like, "Whoa, geez, that's really powerful." And we briefly touched on before, you have a tattoo on your chest, and sometimes you can get apprehensive about telling people what it really means, because it's linked to that time. But kind of when you do so much self-compassion and work, and you kind of have a good positive circle around you, and you've kind of grown as a person, it sometimes it doesn't really mean it doesn't affect you as much, because you're emotionally stronger and you have more emotional variety or vocabulary to discuss it.
Yeah, massively so, massively so. I think you just hit a massive point. There's a self-development coach called Jay Shetty. We mentioned this a few weeks
Yeah,
ago. He's talking about how important it is to have a wide range of emotional vocabulary. You know, so if you ask someone, "How's your day been?" They're like, "Oh, it's been fine," or "How are you feeling today?" "I'm angry." Or there's so much more depth to the words that we say, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. Personally, as I developed more a wider emotional vocabulary, it became a lot easier to express how I felt, therefore a lot easier to connect to how I felt and cope with it, and not be a prisoner to it.
yeah, and kind of since our discussion about this, I actually done a little bit digging around it, and it's quite interesting. There's a lady from Harvard University over in the US who's kind of written a book about emotional agility. I highly recommend listeners check it out. Drop it into Google, and it pops up with a nice little. They do like an emotional agility quiz where you can fill in a few questions and actually send you a free report about some of the emotional vocabulary kind of side of things, links with your values and your kind of personal development wise. It's pretty good resource. Just want to circle back to a couple of things there we talked about in terms of the like self-compassion. So my viewpoint on vulnerability is this, yeah, there's the uncertainty, there's the risk, and then there's that emotional exposure. So like with myself, I am happily going to put myself in uncertain circumstances, go in, do public speaking, do courses, bloody go surfing when I can't really swim very well. Yeah,
It's true, guys.
true. Personal experience. Him going flying out on his very first time surfing, me still just panicking and be like, "Oh, don't let my ego get the better of me. Don't let my ego get the better of me." Okay, the ego's got the better of me. I'm going out. but but then that emotional exposure as well is quite a powerful thing, and I think nowadays there's a lot of people that are kind of emotionally not ready to expose themselves to their friends, family, whatever else. But then you also have the flip side where they're more than willing to expose themselves emotionally in, say, a social media context, but they can't have them conversations in a face-to-face encounter. And it's like there's a bit of a disconnect. I think we need to get more, as we said, emotionally agile, emotional awareness, self-awareness, and then
Why do you think that is?
I think it all boils down to validation. So it comes through a kind of thing that I classify as when someone goes and does a bodybuilding competition. Okay, so in terms, or in my case, maybe a marathon, half marathon. It depends what the intrinsic driver for that marathon or bodybuilding competition is. So is it an extrinsic validation? So do you do a bodybuilding competition or a run to get a medal, to take a picture, to post on bloody Facebook afterwards, to get some people to say, well done, congrats, you did the Great North Run or won a bodybuilding competition. And if that's your driver, after a while, that doesn't validate you, because you need to then push the boundaries. You need to go higher and or longer, or you need to do something more challenging. Whereas if the driver is an intrinsic driver, say with my own story is dad died quite young, same as yourself, and is a case of poor health, bad diet, bad lifestyle choices, too much booze, alcohol. So therefore I use exercise as a means to maintain my fitness, my health, because I don't want to put myself in that situation. So the driver is a bit more intrinsic.
Mine wasn't. Mine was the polar opposite. Mine was, so looking back, so ego driven, because I never reached my expectations of what I set for myself. I felt like I had to do so. Like, one of the biggest driving forces, and this sounds really, makes me cringe saying it, but I think a lot of people, if they really dig deep, could probably connect to it. I did that bodybuilding competition, and I aimed for the top on everything that I've done, so I could be like, look how great I am. I want the world to recognize how great I am, because really, to the core, it's not how I felt. And the only way I knew how to be great was through competition and through winning. You know, through growing up, I was massively praised through winning, and everyone in my family and all my family's friends would religiously install in me, God, Max is so competitive. Max is so competitive. My inner voice. I remember someone asked me, what was your reference of life? You know, is it a dance? Is it a movie? And mine was a competition. And it was, you know, and it was only until I really dug deep, and I was like, why am I so competitive? Why do I feel like I need to win so much? And unless I was winning, unless I was first, and it's sad, really sad, I was absolutely nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean, it drove me to depression.
Yeah.
It drove me to total depression. Like, I remember I'd moved up to Newcastle. My dad had just passed away. I'd just done a bodybuilding competition, done really, really well in it. It was my first competition. I'd come like second and sixth in Great Britain. Which
pretty damn good.
For an 18-year-old who'd never done it before. Dad was just dying. You know, I never gave myself credit. That was just, you know, it is what it is. And, you know, other people go through things at the same time. Moved to Newcastle, new job, new house, no friends. And I remember starting personal training at Newcastle, and I was the top selling personal trainer in the whole country within the first 6 weeks. And again, it was also, I could be like, look how great I am. And I remember pulling up, I just bought a BMW 1 Series, who I told everyone about, because if you don't know about it, then, you know, what's the point in even having it? I just bought a fancy watch, and I remember pulling up to work with a diary packed in a position where loads of people would have killed to be in the same position. And I remember crying outside before I went into work, because I was so unhappy, and I just didn't know why I was so unhappy. And I didn't have because I was only 19 at the time, I didn't have the emotional understanding or the real strong sense of who I was to know why I was so unhappy. And then I started getting into drugs, because I was happy when I was taking drugs, and drugs is not something that I have ever really, you know, for people who knew me growing up, when we go to parties, I wouldn't drink, I wouldn't take drugs, you know, like I was very focused. Again, it was always about, you know, look how great I am. I'm the most disciplined person here. I'm not having any alcohol, you know, it's mad looking back. But I remember being so upset and just down, and I just didn't know why. And I thought it was because I was grieving for my dad, or because I didn't know anyone, or what. It was crazy. But looking back, it was because my main driver was to impress other people, and it was to you know, make myself look good. If I'm honest, when I set up a gym, as well as it being desperation, a lot of it again was to fulfill that ego of look how great I am. And it's fallen very lucky for me that I've actually massively been humbled and recognized that the satisfaction of how much I can help people and how much of a life-changing place it is for a lot of people, that outweighs my ego,
Yeah.
a billion.
And that's kind of a beautiful story as well. And it's not just words as well with you. It's a case of its actions. So I remember the very first time me and Max went down to the gym, and then there was a boot camp going on in the background, and then this little like 4 or 5 year old girl just ran over, gave you a hug, hugged your leg as we were talking. You got extra points because you had a cup of coffee in hand as well for me, which is my vice. And then straight away started talking about personal development and growth and kind of reading all the same books. And I was like, you're actually living and breathing this, because that little kid is an example of that. It's a case of, I'm a big believer that kids can pick up on positive energy and positive people and people that are good people. So kind of it's through that journey that I think, you're helping so many more people than you probably even realize, and even probably the future generations, because you're setting an example for them kids. So fair play.
Oh, sorry, Dan, I totally lost you there. It was getting such a crucial part. I got to the bit. We'll carry on. The viewers here.
We'll carry on. So you kind of definitely pretty powerful story, and as we talked about before, like the ego is the enemy. It's the sooner people realize, actually, again, your ego in check, and there's a fine line between having your ego in check, and then there's the self-compassion, self-worth, and sometimes it's understanding whether that driver is intrinsic or extrinsic, and kind of, are you giving yourself enough self-compassion and self-worth, or is it kind of way too much and you're inflated?
Absolutely.
And I've been through that journey myself, and kind of, again, lucky enough, I've close, what's that saying? Yeah, you're the average of the 5 people you hang around with. I have some of the most cynical friends, so anytime I feel my ego is ticking over on that side, I'll phone them up and say, here, what do you think of this? And they'll cut the legs from under me. But that's the reason I reach out and call them during them times.
See, that's amazing, man, that the fact that you're humble enough to surround yourself with people like that. I mean, fortunately now I'm in where it's very, very similar. However, looking back at stages of my life, actually, no, if I'm honest, throughout the stages of my life, I was surrounded with people who would reinforce the belief that I wasn't good enough, which probably drove me more so to. Whereas now I've got a really good balance of honest, kind friends like yourself, who say it how it is, but also celebrate your victory with you as well. Because I think that's very important, as and again, that's not to fuel the ego, but it's really, really important to encourage the wins as well. Because I think moving forwards in anything, no one moving forwards towards something that they want. And when you've got people who you love and people whose opinion that you value of celebrating that with you, it amplifies the feeling of success, I think.
Yeah, and there's a really good analogy I always love in these kind of situations. It's almost like having a ladder. I think I heard this from Brian Keane, and it's a case of, if your driver is that extrinsic validation from your friends, social media, work colleagues, from your occupation as such, or from kind of people down the gym, whatever, you put this ladder against one wall and you start climbing like fuck. I'm sorry, excuse me, listeners, this is going to be a cursing podcast. I'm Irish. And they start climbing like fuck up that ladder, hoping that at the end they're going to reach nirvana or whatever. But it's only when you get to the top then they realize, actually, I didn't put the ladder here. It was put here by people on social media. It was put here by other people that I was trying to achieve validation through. It wasn't where I wanted to be. And it's only then when you realize, actually, climb back down the ladder, you get another ladder and you start moving along and realize where you want to be. And it's probably only half the height.
Yeah, and do you know what it is? And that's and that's hard to climb down from that ladder, because you feel that you've then just conned yourself, and that's the hard conversation you got to have yourself, because it's like, then you're like, shit, I really don't know who I am.
Yeah, And that's the perfect analogy for it. Staring back down at the ground, you're like, oh shit, oh my god, I'm scared. I don't know what's going to happen when I get back down. Are they going to mock me? Are they going to jeer me? Are they going to celebrate me for being emotionally strong to come back down? Or will I just stay up here and be unhappy at this destination at the top of this ladder? But I don't want to be here.
And do you know what it is, Darren, as well? What I've realised is people don't think about you as much as you think they do. They're too busy thinking about what you're thinking about them. So when it comes to making these big changes, we think so much what are people going to think. The reality is people don't spend as much time thinking about you as you think they do. And sometimes we think we can become so aware, consumed by what people will think, that we actually take ourselves so far away from the reality that it prevents us from taking any action. And as soon as I realized that people actually aren't that bothered about, as long as my actions aren't having a negative impact on people, the decisions that I make in my life, people don't really care. Like, everyone's doing their own thing. When I'd like to think that I'm a compassionate person, and I do think about a lot of people throughout the day. But again, you only think about people when you choose to think about people. As soon as you switch that off, then you go back to your own little world of what you're doing and what you need to do. And it's the same for everyone. And I think as soon as I learned that, everyone's just trying to get through life themselves and everyone's going through the same, then it became a lot easier to make certain changes in direction. Because, you can't change your destination overnight, but you can change your direction overnight. And when you do change that direction, quite often, people don't know when you drive on your way to somewhere. There's so many left and right turns. Half the time, people can't remember which left and right they took on the way there. And
True enough. So kind of back to when you said you were sat in that car park, probably ripped as shit, swanky watch on, brand spanking new Beamer, but then obviously quite emotional, quite kind of just down. And how did you flip that around? What was your kind of next stages?
I moved into drugs initially. I didn't get out of a good place straight away. I moved into drugs. I started smoking a lot of weed,
Mm-hmm.
and again, me being who I am, I smoked the most weed. It was a case of just trying to. I don't know. I thought it was cool. It was the polar opposite of. I spent a year of absolute 100% discipline, to the point where, and I knew where I was moving to. I knew the definitive date, and I was moving towards that. And it took me a couple of years to get over that bodybuilding competition. It really psychologically knocked me back, actually, because it was my biggest sense of who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And when I moved away and I didn't have my mentor around me, I didn't have a competition to work towards, I didn't have all the intelligent, keen, driven fitness professionals around me who were encouraging me along the way, and I was left on my own. I was very, very lost. Very lost. I'd suddenly had no real reason to be disciplined because I didn't have a competition, and it was the unless you've done something that's so extreme, where because I realized that there's totally different barrels to your brain. Like, this is going a little bit off track, but I remember sat on my Xbox and I was absolutely peeled. I could see veins on veins. And I remember sat and I'd done my MyFitnessPal for the day, so I knew that I had all the calories, everything was done, and I'd finished my last meal. And I sat and I was playing the Xbox, and then I suddenly got really confused, and I was like, I've got another meal. And I was like, wait, look at my MyFitnessPal. I was like, I don't have another meal. And my brain was going, no, you've got another meal. And I was like, but I filled it all in. And he was like, oh yeah, you didn't have that meal though, did you? And I was having an actual war in my head about something that didn't exist. I remember a personal trainer said to me, when you start getting into the depths of low body fat percentage, your mind's going to start playing tricks on you, because your brain wants you to eat food to keep you alive. And if you're trying to do the polar opposite, your mind's going to play tricks on you at times. And I remember just sat there and I went, and I thought, fucking hell, there are so many different chambers to yourself that you don't realize until you're exposed at a really deep, intense level, you know, and that was at 18 years old. To learn that was quite like, you know, you don't have a lot of tools in your toolkit to be able
Yeah.
to nurture yourself at that age. So it was a bit like, whoa. So going back, that level of extreme intensity of mental focus to then coming up to Newcastle to not having that, other than obviously my personal training, but the personal training was for other people. It wasn't,
For you.
again, it wasn't intrinsic.
Mhm.
It was, I remember just turning to drugs. I was smoking weed. I got into mushrooms. Um, it was only really until I had the worst magic mushrooms trip of my life that I was like, I need to stop this. I ended up calling my mum at 3 a.m. off my rocker on mushrooms, being like, "Mum, I'm dying, I'm dying." Poor mum through it. And she was freaking out. I was like, "Mum, you need to come and save me." I literally thought I was dying. I forgot, I was so high, I forgot that I was having magic mushrooms, and I thought I was having a mental breakdown, and I was worried that if I couldn't go to sleep, I was going to die. It was like crazy. Until my mate gave me a bit of pizza, and then I was like, "Oh, Mum, I'm actually all right." Waking up the next day and being like, right, that was just such a psychological shift, and I don't know whether that's, you know, anything to do with the psychedelics, but it was so psychologically traumatizing. It made me be like, right, I need to get my shit together now, because
Yeah.
that was not fun.
Right, we're going to come back to that psychedelic mushroom trip kind of on another date, because I'll happily go down this rabbit hole with you and talk about our own trips and experiences. For the sake of today, so we've kind of talked about kind of that self-compassion and that kind of lack of identity. And like self-compassion is such a big, powerful thing. Like, and it's a case of there's lots of different tools, strategies people use to kind of help with that. So kind of one of the kind of most widely known ones is that kind of love and kindness meditations. So
Yeah.
again, we're so good at trying to seek compassion, and you know, as you said yourself, you're kind of giving that compassion out and kind of adding so much value to people's lives. But then sometimes you don't turn it in internally and say, well, actually, have I given myself any love? And actually, if you don't love yourself for who you are, stripped back of all the identities. And I think that there's going to be a huge side of things at the back end of this, where people have had their social identity kind of stripped back because they haven't been the person out in the gym lifting weights, and they're not going to have that. Well, I am jacked. Once I start going back into society and back to normality, they're not going to be having that. Well, I'm the social one, because no, you haven't done anything for the last 3 months, because you haven't had social outlets, you haven't had gigs to go to, pubs to go to, clubs to go to. And this is the most pivotal time, in my opinion, for people to do them, that deep work, that personal development stuff, that
100%.
that period where you go in, you ask them difficult questions, you lean into them uncomfortable areas, and kind of find out actually who you want to be. Like, you know,
Sure. For sure.
what,
You don't. I've definitely noticed with the lack of distractions going on, how I mean, how much your emotions change. And I think sometimes we get our emotions confused with, sorry, we get mental health confused with emotions, you know. And I know that's quite a big statement to make, and I know there's hundreds of millions of people who really suffer with their mental health, but also I'm someone who really believed that I suffered with my mental health, and at certain stages of my life I definitely did. However, what I've come to realize is that just emotions come up and down, they chop and change.
Mhm.
And just because I'm having a day where my emotions aren't great doesn't mean that I'm mentally ill, which is what I believed, and I think it's thrown out there quite a lot now. We're quick to jump on the bandwagon, but really I think during this time it's been amazing to become comfortable with knowing that some days are good, some days are bad, but it passes.
yeah,
And now to realize that, oh wow, I didn't feel great yesterday, but I feel good today. Oh, I feel better. I feel amazing now. Oh, I don't feel great now. It just chops and changes. And for a long time, I thought that I was mentally ill. I thought I'm so traumatized from my childhood. I'm so, I don't know what's going on in my head. I know, I'm so up and down. I'm either up here or down here. There's no much middle ground. I thought I've got an illness, but I've come to realize that I think personally, for me anyway, and I can't speak for the general public, but I think a lot of my mental health worries were actually just strong emotions.
Yeah, and you touched on some beautiful points there. It's a case of I never thought about it from that perspective, but you're bang on the money in terms of the mental health and emotional health, for want of a kind of better term phrase. We have mental health, we have emotional health, and then we have kind of what I'll classify for simplicity is physical health. And people will chop and change, and people will get so inside their head that they're overanalyzing every last detail that they've done, and kind of a bit more of a like an anxious mindset state. And we kind of briefly touched on this a few times that we've met in terms of sympathetic nervous system is your kind of fight or flight. And kind of if it is a case you're worried or anxious or about the future, and we all are to a certain extent at the moment because there's lots of uncertainty, your mind is going to run down a kind of rabbit hole that which is completely normal. But just sit with the emotions. Don't try and fight them. A lot of people try and fight these emotions and wrestle them. No, I'm gonna.
They don't leave.
Yeah, I'm gonna pin you down. Get down.
Until I decide that I'm ready to not let you go again.
Yeah, and kind of if they keep on resurfacing, it's a sign that you need to go and actually ask that question. Why is it there? Is it because emotionally I'm not happy in my job or relationships or kind of families or social circles, or is it the relationship with myself? And they're all really powerful things, and kind of you need to kind of dig down through the kind of emotions, fear, anger, sadness, grief. And kind of personally with myself, I only kind of, and this is me from being a self-aware person and doing a lot of personal development. I only got counseling from my dad passing away like last year, like 14 years after he passed away, because I was a bit of emotionally stunted and I was good at suppressing it. If I felt like shit, go, Grant, I'll just go for a 2-hour run. I remember like a past relationship broke down, and I was pretty hurt by the breakup with her. And then I was back home in Dublin. I was like, I feel like shit. I could sit around and I could turn and talk to my family, or I know I'll just go for a run. So I literally turned and went for a like 2.5 hour run. Came back and it was just like, what the hell? But that was my way of it, just dealing with it, become physically numb that I didn't have to deal with the emotion. Max? Hello? Hello, folks. Sorry about that. This is going to be a completely unedited podcast because that's life. There's mistakes. Just deal with it. So if you're farting, burping, cursing, blinding, we're just going to let it all hang out there because that's life. Anyway, so we're kind of briefly touching on, again, some kind of my journey in terms of kind of that emotionally stunted, managed to suppress it with booze, drugs, just going out partying, or exercise. And kind of it was a case of I used kind of exercise as a coping strategy. And it was only once I realized I was back home after a bad breakup with an ex, pretty messy with her, and then kind of ended up being at home with my family and saying, do you know what? I could talk about this right now, which would have been the healthier option, or I'll just go for a run. So go out for, so I literally went, and I wasn't fit, nowhere near like the level of fitness that I should have had for this, but I went out for like 2.5 hour run and came back and they were like, where were you? I was like, I just needed a run. And I just left it at that, went back up to bed. It was like physically draining my physical health so much, so I was emotionally numb that I didn't have to deal with it. And that's where it's key. So it's understanding them, the mental health, emotional health, and physical health. Because correct me if you're wrong, or if I'm wrong here, but I like to think that societally wise, people are starting to kind of get the picture that from a physical health standpoint, people are quite well aware that it's pretty damn important.
Yeah.
And kind of now there's a bit, the stigma's lifted off the mental health a little bit as well recently over the last couple of years. But that emotional health, I think people are quite still naive about the impact that it can play on how we feel, move.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, I am no finished project by any means, and a lot of the stuff that I'm saying, I'm sure that there's a million things that people could add on that could challenge. I spend an hour a day, every single day, doing some form of personal development, and I still know, and I still battle every day the same battles that I had when I started. However, each day the battles just get a little bit shorter and not
Mm-hmm.
quite as long. Um, but I know that there's still so much work. Every time you open a door, every time you close a door, you turn around and then you see another one's open. You're like, oh God, it's kind of a never-ending thing. But that is the beauty of it. And quite often we can look at that and be like, oh my God, there's so many doors I've got to open. Oh, and we get so overwhelmed with what we have to do to be able to become the person that we are, and to the point where we think, oh my God, I've got so many problems. Again, I'm only speaking from my experience, but as soon as I switched my flip on that, rather than looking at, oh my God, I've got so much to work on, I looked at it as a, wow, I've got so much to work on.
Yeah.
Like, this is like, I can really, it's growth now. So rather than it being a chore of, I've got so much to do, it's, wow, I've got so far to go. So there's so much more of the journey. Progress equals happiness. And again, I said this at the start. If you suddenly change your goal from I'm broken, I'm wrecked, to I'm going to become the best person I can possibly be and the happiest person I can possibly be, these are the tasks that I've got to do. When you start ticking off those tasks, that creates the feeling of progress. And you never ever feel bad when you are moving towards a goal that you want to achieve. If you think of an area of your life where you're really happy in, it's an area that's growing and improving. And then if you were to flip that and think of an area where you're not happy in, it's an area that's not improving. And I remember Tony Robbins said, questions control what you focus on, and what you focus on is what you experience. So if your experience is quite disempowering, if it's overwhelming, it's probably because you're focusing on overwhelming, disempowering things by speaking in an overwhelming and disempowering way. And as soon as I learned that, I started changing the way that I spoke to myself, which changed the way things that I focused on, which changed my experience. And that really helped me become able to understand myself a little bit more and recognize how much actually goes on in here and how important it is to link the two together.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a case of that kind of, I'm a big proponent of everyone should go on a holiday once a year by themselves, even if it's just a weekend. I do it every year, minimum of kind of 2 to 3 days. And it's to see how you're talking to yourself internally as well. Because you say, like at the moment, you remove all the busyness and all the distractions by going on holiday once a year by yourself, because you've removed work stuff, you've removed relationship stuff, family stuff. Switch off the phone and figure out how you speak to yourself, because that's pretty damn important. Um, there's a great researcher over in America called Gabor Mate, and he talks about kind of, instead of asking why the addiction to certain things, so in our year nowadays, why the addiction to alcohol, technology, your phones, whatever, instead of asking why the addiction, you should be asking why the pain or why the hurt. So you're trying to dig down why they feel hurt, because the addiction and the substance or the alcohol or the drugs or the phone is just it's just a coping strategy. It's not resolving the root cause of the problem, being why they feel hurt or lack of self-worth, lack of identity. And it's only through that development process, the personal development process, that you kind of get there, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, this is where I was, and I'm sure there's a lot of people like that. When you have these sort of conversations and when you hear these sort of things, and you're like, yeah, I've got loads to work on, I'm not happy, I have X, Y, and Z. A lot of us leave it at that. I'm unhappy, because we don't have the toolkit of knowing how to get out of that state. So quite a lot of us, and again, I'm talking generally. I might be wrong here, but from what I've seen in my own experience with myself I've recognized it in others. I think your mindset for a lot of people is like you've suddenly just woken up in a state of panic and you're in a helicopter and you are the one flying the helicopter, but no one has taught you any of the control panels. That is a crazy stressed out place to be. It's so much panic, and that's what it can be like in your head sometimes. You know, your mind's going crazy. Oh my God, what's going to happen? We don't have any control of it. And I think from these conversations, what's really important is to teach people tools of how to create more compassion. You know, when we're saying it's important to be compassionate to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
How do you become more compassionate to yourself? It's important to love yourself. How do you love yourself? You know, like a lot of us actually don't have the tools. We don't know how to do it. And, you know, one of the biggest things that I do for myself, which has made me not need validation from other people quite as much. Again, I'm still human. There is times where I feel like I need it or want it, but I don't rely on it solely now. Is I pretty much say well done to myself for everything that I don't want to do. So when I get up at 5 a.m. for boot camp and I get in the shower, I say, well done, Max, well done, whilst I'm cleaning myself. As soon as I get off and I'm making my breakfast and I've weighed it out, well done, Max, brilliant, that's great. You know, we're very, very critical to ourselves. We're like, oh, I should have done this, I should have done this, I should have done this. And you become great at what you do every day. But, you know, if you were to ask yourself, what am I great at that's detrimental to me getting the outcome that I want or who I want to become? And that's quite an interesting question. But quite often, none of us have very positive self-talk. It's usually very, very critical. And when you start talking to yourself in a really compassionate way, motivating way, or however it is that you want to feel, you'll start really, really feeling that you don't need it from other people because you get it from yourself. And then when you get it from other people, then it's just a sprinkle on the cake.
Yeah. It's pretty powerful if you can generate that feeling, that emotion yourself from giving yourself that pat on the back. That's powerful beyond measure.
Do you know what it is, Darren? For me personally, I again a real core belief. We're really, really consistent to who we believe we are. You know, that's the thing that humans are the most consistent with. So, for instance, if someone comes up to me and says, I want to stop smoking, but I've always been a smoker." You know, I know that their core belief is that they're a smoker, so it's not going to last long until they are smoking again. And for me, I feel quite lucky because a lot of the core beliefs that have been installed for myself, I've managed to turn into a positive. But some of the core beliefs are negative. So one of them is I'm quite naive. I believe people. I pretty much believe everything I hear. And for a lot of people, they'll think, oh, well, that's what makes you stupid. But to be honest, being really naive has actually helped me create a bloody strong self-esteem and driving force, because if someone goes, wow, you're really good at that, I'm like, wow, I'm really good at that. Or, you know, or if I hear something from a personal development coach say, you know, do a little bit of spiel, I take it and I really absorb it and I really believe it. So being naive sometimes and not being cynical is a really, really great way to absorb more of the tools, and you can become, you know, but then again, at the same time, it can work totally the opposite way. If the information that you're taking in is negative, you're really bad at that. So again, my biggest stop in life was that I believed that I was stupid. My core belief was that I was stupid. You know, so I've just started reading. Reading for me was something that caused me major anxiety because I was, you know, it's taken me years, only really the past, since I opened the gym, I've realized that I'm not stupid, but my core belief was that I was stupid because I'm very dyslexic and very naive, and at school or at home, you know, that's my mum. She's amazing, everything she possibly could. But, you know, when we were at parents' evening, you might hear things like, you know, Max really struggles with his reading. And hearing that gets, you know, I really struggle with my reading. My core belief is I struggle with my reading. My mum says that. Teachers say that. That's just how I am. When you're in school, if you struggle with reading, you're in the bottom set. And if you're in the bottom sets, you're stupid. And if you're stupid, you don't have much hope. You know, so for me, being naive has had both a positive and negative impact, but creating self-awareness about that has allowed me to be able to utilize it as a tool to now feeding my mind with positive things. So I'm doing an hour a day of personal development and listening to someone who has got valuable, constructive, empowering information, listening to that and absorbing it as a sponge. The byproduct of what I'm listening to is what I'm becoming.
Yeah.
Whereas quite often, I think, one, a lot of people don't even know what personal development is. Two, if they did know, they don't know who to follow, who to listen to, where to look for it. I didn't know how. You know, it's only really recently I've learned how to use Google. I know that sounds really, really stupid, but I didn't know what questions to ask. I was like, I wasn't self-aware enough to know who I wanted to be, and I didn't know who I needed to speak to, what I need to follow. But again, the question was, I wasn't saying who do I want to be, where am I now, where do I want to be, and how do I get there? The quality of the question was poor, and when you ask a poor quality question, you get a poor quality answer. And quite often, a lot of us are asking poor quality questions and we're getting poor quality answers, and that's why we never really get the outcome that we want, because the questions that we're asking ourselves aren't really constructive enough to get the outcome that we want.
Oh, knowledge bomb. That's pretty damn smart, insightful viewpoint of the whole lot, and yeah, pretty impressive stuff. So I heard a great quote by Ross Edgley, and this case of naivety kind of is a very positive thing as well, because it means you're open, your eyes and your kind of peripheral vision is so huge. And it's a case of, he talks about his open water swim side of things, where it was like he was too naive to start, or too naive to start, and too stubborn not to finish. And it's a perfect kind of example of, you need to expand your mindset, because our limitations are only placed on ourselves. And that naivety has, as we said earlier on in the conversation, a negative connotation and a positive connotation. You can look at it either way, but kind of ultimately it's how you flip and reframe that into a positive light that means that you can grow from it.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what it's all about. You know, challenging your core beliefs, and again, that's writing them down. Who do I believe I am? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And how can you can always turn a weakness into a strength. Being naive and being stupid as a core belief has been the biggest key to my success. And I'm not I wouldn't say I'm anywhere near as successful as some people, but I feel that I'm on the pathway to achieve. I've achieved what I wanted to achieve. There's never been anything that I've set for myself that I haven't achieved. So in my eyes, success is simply dictated by the goals that you set for yourself. You know, some people feel like you're only successful if you're a millionaire, or you're only successful if you're a celebrity, but really you're successful when you achieve something that you set for yourself. And being stupid and being naive have been really, really good for me, because they've put me on the pathway to trying to harness that and learn more and believe more and take more action. And
I think, yeah, and that's a kind of beautiful, almost kind of drawn to the close summary of, you're looking at the adversities kind of built you up and kind of give you greater insight into your profession, because you're pretty damn good at your job and set up really successful. So I consider that pretty damn smart. The naive means that you're open to options and suggestions, and open it up to people and ideas, which is even just what this is. And you made a great point, turning them weaknesses. And at one stage, they may have been a weakness that did not serve you, or a belief or a value that didn't serve you. But now you've flipped it on its edge, and now they're serving you tenfold, because you've learned from them, grown from them, and continue to grow from them. So it's kind of really positive.
For people as well, Darren, I want to hear your take on this. For people who aren't ready to look at themselves or have looked at themselves, what tools have you used in your life to be able to utilize your weaknesses as your strengths? Like how have you flipped that?
Yeah, so, and we've talked about it before, like self-awareness is a kind of key thing. So you have emotional intelligence, which is where it talks about self-awareness and social awareness. So self-awareness is going in, right, in say in Max's case, at some stage, that self-worth, naive side of things, or that core belief that he was stupid. They're things, right? Okay, I think these things, are they really true? And then reaching out to a few of your friends, and I've done this a couple of times over the last 5 years actually, where I've gone in, wrote down my five kind of close circle of five friends, and I've sent them a text message. No holds barred, say what you want. What are my greatest strengths, weaknesses, da da da. And kind of, if you think about it,
That's hard. That shows that's serious friendship if you can do that, man.
yeah. And I was like, here, I feed on feedback. I feed on feedback, and I find it really frustrating when someone. So just a keen learner. I want to learn everything, curious mind, and I'll constantly be like that to the day I die. But I struggle when people can't give me feedback because they're worried they're going to hurt my feelings, even though I know emotionally I'm quite resilient and strong, and I can overcome that.
Yeah.
I know.
Do you think that's more about how they feel that they would be able to take it?
Yeah. And so and some of the physios that I line manage and stuff, and it's quite interesting here. Their take that every time I do a session with them, it's a case of actually I haven't just learned physio, I've learned about myself. And I was like, yeah. So kind of if you can spend a couple hours helping someone kind of learn about physio at the same time as developing themselves, that's just gold in my eyes. In terms of tools, strategies, what I'd suggest as a starting point, yeah, you could do that. Top 2 or 3 friends, whatever, drop them a message saying, here, I want to develop, I want to kind of try and know myself more. Write down 3 things, 3 of my strengths, 3 of my weaknesses, and just leave it at that. Let them take it whatever angle they want. They're your friends.
Friends are the type of people, because again, you're quite fortunate to have honest friends, but what happens, because would you not say that that's for some people, again, relying on an extrinsic source of self-validation?
Yeah, and it's how you process it when it comes back. Mm-hmm. So then that's when you need to do your internal work and actually saying, right, well, actually, how do I view myself? Is it aligned with these things? So that's one strategy. And yeah, there's nuances of how you use that information. But as we've talked about before, you dictate how you process it. And it's not that the words are meaning anything, but it's how you process their meaning from your friends.
Yeah.
So that's one strategy. In terms of if you are, say, lacking that confidence in yourself, and I've done this with a few people, so I have a whiteboard in my room where I kind of write down 3 wins every day. So 3 mini wins can be as simple as, yeah. So again, and it's just that compound interest effect, bang, 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 every day, each week. Okay, well, actually, shit, I just hit 21 wins this week. Even if I had a shit week, I hit 21 mini wins. So that's going to just gradually build up confidence over time.
And that definitely goes back to information controls what you focus on. What you focus on is what you experience. If you're experiencing, wow, I look at these 21 wins, because you focus on the 21 wins because you've made the statement of, look at my 21 wins. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. I think that's brilliant.
And the third and final thing is pick up a phone. So again, as Max and we talked about at the start, uncertainty, risk, emotional exposure, these are all things that symbolize vulnerability in a negative connotation. But at the same time, vulnerability can be a birthplace of just lots of power and lots of creativity, lots of kind of just empathy and kind of actually growth. So kind of use that as an opportunity to grow by kind of going and reaching out, talk to a friend, talk to a professional if you don't feel comfortable talking about these things. But kind of in these unprecedented times, it's really important to reach out and talk to someone. And this is the problem a lot of people have, is that inability to express their emotions. And then they seek the answer through someone else or something else, or they avoid.
Self-worth's a big, I think people sometimes don't reach out because they don't think that what they have to say is important.
Yeah, I have the kind of angle of every single person I encounter or have an interaction with, I can learn something from.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to grow from it, but it means that hopefully they will.
Yeah, yeah, totally. No, I think you're absolutely bang on the money there, Darren.
And kind of my
being creative
yeah,
with being vulnerable. I think when you're vulnerable, you're more you, and there's only one you, and there's only only you think in a certain way, and that creates a unique thought process, which then is creative, I guess, because anything that's unique is creative, isn't it?
exactly. Be authentic, be yourself. And kind of my kind of passion, kind of what I want to kind of hopefully kind of continue on growing and kind of using this podcast to grow is share the message of strategies, tools, and habits to kind of help with the mental health, help with your physical health, and also the emotional health, because I think we all need to kind of flip that societal weakness on its head, being that emotionally unaware or emotionally stunted or emotionally neglected, and flip it on its head and actually make that a strength. So if we look at political leaders of today, check out the New Zealand Prime Minister. She's awesome. She's like grown lots of kind of public awareness because she's leading from a point of emotional intelligence, empathy, honesty, and ultimately vulnerability. She just addressed the whole country in her pajamas after putting her like little girl to bed, just being like, here, I'm just sitting checking base and kind of make sure that everyone's okay, wish you good night. And I was like, that's powerful. That's the way, they're the type of leaders that we need in the world.
Yeah, sure, because people like themselves or like how they want to be, and rapport is power. Like, if you've got a leader who you have a strong level of rapport with, anyone who you've got a strong level of rapport with, you respect and you're prepared to go out your way for to help. And with being a leader, rapport is power. But there's the two most influential ways to get in rapport is one, being like the person, or two, being people like themselves or like how they want to be. So if you think about your best friend, they're either like you or there's qualities that they have which you aspire to be like. And I think with being a strong leader, if they're either like you or there's qualities about them which you aspire to be like, it's a lot easier to build rapport. But the polar opposite is the same thing. How not to get rapport. If you think about someone you really, really dislike or have no rapport with, it's because they're either nothing like you or not how you want to be. And I think a lot of leaders who are put on the world scale are either nothing like everyone or not like how people want to be, and that's why that rapport just doesn't get made.
Yeah, and you can still respect someone even though they're not like you. You can still have them respect for them for being in the position that they are, and just be kind as well. This case of not everyone has to be like you. We're all different. We're all unique. We're all unique individual creatures, and we are, as we talked about, creatures, humans, creatures. We're emotional creatures who are social. We're not social creatures who are emotional. And this is kind of where we don't have that social outlet anymore at present because of lockdown. But we are still emotional. So kind of just bear that in mind and thinking, right, actually, do I need to be a bit more social? Phone a friend, talk to someone, or actually, do you just need to get to grips with them emotions that are kind of rising up and kind of coming to boiling point? Right, I think we've hit a kind of nice natural close, Max.
It's been emotional.
It's totes emotion, man. But it's been great having you on. Tell us a bit more about where people can find out more about you.
So we run a gym called Maximum Fitness. It's in Killingworth in Camperdown Industrial Estate. We run one-to-one personal training sessions and we do boot camps. The boot camps aren't like your normal boot camp. It's a really, really personalized workout. So everyone who comes through the door, we make sure we know who's coming through the gym. Our business modules based on the 6 basic human needs. So at any point when you're in the gym, 3 of your needs are going to be met, whether that's certainty, love and connection, significance, growth, contribution. You're going to feel alive when you're in that place. The workouts that we put out there are designed to help you recognize progress and, help other people become more than they currently are as well. So it's just a great place to be, really, Darren. You know, we run 30-minute classes, so they're short but intense, but anyone can do them. There's always a regression and a progression. So regardless of how fit or strong you are, you can always get a good workout from it. And regardless of how unfit you are, there's always something for you to do to start those building blocks to becoming a fitter, stronger version of yourself.
Better version of yourself. And if you want that and need a coach, Max and his team are the people to shout out to. But yeah, love what you're doing. Keep it up, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon. No doubt a regular attender on the podcast, because just love kicking back and chatting with you.
Absolutely, man. I really enjoyed it today. Thanks, Darren.
All right. Stay safe. Peace out. Love.